The Denver International Airport was buzzing as the evening sun dipped behind the Rockies, painting the terminal in fiery orange and pink streaks. Passengers hustled along the gates with luggage rolling behind them, but Mark Davis barely noticed. He was too busy making sure his son, Jamie, didn't trip over his own excitement. At 12 years old, Jamie was obsessed with aviation. The boy's backpack was plastered with patches of fighter jets, airport codes, and his favorite, a tiny replica of an F-22 Raptor. Today was a special day. They were flying to Seattle to visit Mark's sister, but for Jamie, every flight was a mission. Mark scanned the boarding line nervously. He was a single father, juggling work, bills, and parenting, and flights always made him anxious. He clutched the boarding passes in his hand like a lifeline. Beside him, Jamie was bouncing on his heels, eyes wide as he peered at the long fuselage stretching into the sky. "Dad, can you believe it?" Jamie asked, pointing at the plane. 9,000 meters. That's like almost up to where fighter jets start training. I read all about it. Mark smiled, ruffling his son's dark hair. "Yeah, kiddo. You're gonna have fun, but remember to stay in your seat and keep that headset on." Jamie barely heard him. He was already pressing the buttons on his handheld radio scanner, trying to pick up air traffic communications. The device crackled with static and snippets of distant voices, and he smiled with the thrill of understanding the language of the sky. Once they boarded, they settled into seats 12E and 12F, a window and an aisle, just as Mark had reserved months ago. Jamie immediately pressed his nose to the window, eyes glued to the tarmac below. The cabin smelled faintly of recycled air and coffee, the murmur of passengers and rolling suitcases mixing into a soft white noise. Mark sighed and leaned back, feeling the familiar tension of flight anxiety tug at him. He had flown countless times for work, but something about this evening flight felt different. Perhaps it was the fading light, the deepening shadows on the runway, or simply the weight of responsibility for keeping his son safe. The plane began to taxi. Engines thrummed, a low vibration running through the seats, and Jamie squealed with excitement. "We're moving. This is it, Dad." As the aircraft lifted from the runway, cutting through a thin mist, Jamie clutched his radio scanner tightly. He switched frequencies, picking up bits of air traffic chatter and pilot communications. He was fascinated by the way each voice had authority, urgency, and precision. Every time he heard a word like vector or mayday, his pulse quickened. Mark watched his son, a mixture of pride and amusement warming him. Jamie was small but fierce, obsessed with precision and rules. He had memorized cockpit procedures from flight simulators and read every manual he could find on aviation safety. "One day, you're going to fly one of those," Mark had joked 1,000 times, and Jamie would nod solemnly as if he already had. The seatbelt sign pinged off, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the soft hum of the engines filled the plane with a steady rhythm. Passengers adjusted themselves, some leaning over tablets or phones, others chatting quietly and a few catching naps. Mark reached for his coffee cup, but it slipped slightly in his hand, spilling a small drop onto the tray table. He sighed and wiped it away, glancing at the calm, curious face of his son. At 30,000 feet, the plane was smooth and steady. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a gradient of deep purple and gold. Jamie pressed his forehead to the window and whispered to himself, barely audible over the engine hum. "Imagine if we went up higher, like the F-22s, Dad. You think we'd see them?" Mark chuckled softly. "I hope not. Those jets are way faster than us. Besides, we're supposed to stay in our own lane up here." Jamie smiled, but his mind was already racing. He imagined himself in the cockpit, holding a call sign, communicating with the fastest fighters in the sky. The fantasy made him shiver with excitement, a thrill that was both innocent and oddly prescient. Suddenly, a subtle vibration ran through the plane. Mark frowned, thinking it was normal turbulence, but then the humming of the engines faltered. "Just a brief dip," just a subtle hiccup but enough to make his stomach tighten. He looked around, noticing other passengers shifting in their seats. "Probably just turbulence," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Jamie's eyes, however, were fixed on the instrument panel above the flight attendant's seats. The numbers flickered for a heartbeat, a tiny anomaly in the readout. His pulse quickened. He had studied this exact scenario in simulations. A dual-engine failure, it was rare, almost impossible, but he had to think. A louder shudder ran through the plane. Coffee cups rattled, the overhead bins creaked. A woman gasped, "What's happening?" Mark's hands gripped the armrests. Flight attendants rushed down the aisle, trying to calm passengers while checking instruments themselves. The plane's engines groaned, then stuttered again. This time, the cabin lights flickered in warning. "Everyone remain seated," one attendant instructed, voice calm but tense. "Keep your seatbelts fastened. The crew is handling the situation." Mark's heart pounded. He looked at Jamie, whose face had grown serious, almost rigid. The boy's fingers tightened on his radio scanner. Something had switched inside him, from excitement to clarity. He was no longer just a passenger. He was an observer, a solver, a kid whose obsession with aviation suddenly felt like preparation for this exact moment. The plane trembled, the engines whining with a metallic protest. Passengers murmured prayers under their breath. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained, tense, almost desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a dual-engine failure. Please remain calm. Follow crew instructions." Mark swallowed hard. Jamie didn't flinch. Instead, the boy leaned forward in his seat, scanning frequencies on his radio, listening, absorbing every sound. His mind raced with procedures he had only read about, rehearsed, and dreamed about. The aircraft jolted again. The seatbelt sign lit up as the plane began to drop, faintly at first, then with increasing urgency. Panic began to ripple through the cabin. People gripped armrests. Bobbies cried. A man across the aisle muttered, "Oh God, no, not now." Mark looked at his son. "Jamie, we need to stay calm, all right?" Jamie nodded, but his hands were already moving, flipping switches on his scanner. He whispered under his breath, not to his father but as a mantra to himself. "If someone's listening, they'll know what to do." The plane's nose tilted downward slightly, the ground no longer a distant memory but a creeping reality. The lights outside streaked in long orange trails. Oxygen masks dangled, but no one dared touch them yet, mesmerized by the terrifying glide. And then a small but unmistakable thought struck Jamie. He could transmit, not just listen. He could speak. Mark's breath caught. He didn't fully understand what his son was about to do. Jamie took a deep breath, gripping his radio with trembling fingers. And somewhere in the clouds above, 2 F-22 Raptors were in training maneuvers. Unaware that a single transmission from a small boy with a call sign could change the fate of everyone aboard this doomed flight. The plane shuddered violently once more. The engines cut out entirely. Passengers screamed. Jamie keyed the mic. "Any military aircraft. This is civilian flight request, urgent." The voice that came through the radio was calm, precise, and terrified all at once. It was the voice that would make fighter pilots stop mid-flight. But would anyone respond in time? And at 9,000 meters, with engines dead and the ground rushing closer, the fate of everyone on the plane hung in the balance. The hum of the engines that had been a steady, reassuring drone just moments ago was gone. The plane shuddered violently as it dropped through thin clouds, passengers gripping seat belts and panicking in waves of terror. Drinks sloshed over the edges of cups. A tray of cutlery clattered onto the floor. The air filled with a chorus of screams, prayers, and gasps. Mark's heart thudded against his ribs as he clutched Jamie's hand, feeling the boy's small, trembling fingers wrap around his. "Dad," Jamie whispered, eyes wide but focused. "We're dropping faster than a glide path should allow." Mark swallowed hard. "I know, kiddo, I know." The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, strained, almost breaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing dual engine failure. I repeat, both engines are unresponsive. Remain calm, stay seated, and follow all crew instructions." But calm was impossible. A woman across the aisle whispered over and over, "This can't be happening. Not now, not now." Her words trembled in rhythm with the plane's violent jolts. Jamie's fingers tightened around his radio scanner. He could hear everything: the scratching of distant frequencies, the chirps of nearby air traffic, the faint but unmistakable hum of signals from aircraft nearby. He had memorized procedure after procedure in his simulations, read manuals until the edges were frayed, and now every detail mattered. Mark noticed his son staring at the readout of the plane's systems. The cabin was dark, broken by the flicker of emergency lights. The seats around them rocked violently with each shudder. Jamie's face was pale but determined. "Dad, I can talk to someone," he said. "Maybe the fighters, maybe someone listening." Mark's breath caught. "Jamie, don't." But the boy had already keyed the mic. "Any military aircraft, this is civilian flight, dual engine failure, requesting immediate intercept, call sign Junior Falcon." Mark froze. The words, though whispered, were broadcast over a frequency meant for trained pilots. Around him, passengers continued to panic. Drinks spilled, shoes slid across the aisle, and overhead bins rattled ominously. At that precise moment, hundreds of kilometers above the Pacific Northwest, two F-22 Raptors were finishing a training maneuver at nearly supersonic speed. Major Cole, veteran pilot and instructor, and his young wingman, LT Vargas, were reviewing a recent air-to-ground exercise when their headphones crackled with an unfamiliar voice. "What in the?" Cole muttered. The voice was small, trembling, but unmistakable. "Civilian flight, dual engine failure, call sign Junior Falcon." Vargas laughed nervously. "That's a kid, sir. That's a kid's voice." "No," Cole said sharply, his eyes narrowed. "That's not just a kid, that's a mayday, and they're serious." Meanwhile, back on the plane, the hum of panic escalated. The oxygen masks dangled uselessly as the aircraft pitched down further. The altimeter ticked downward with horrifying speed. 27000, 24000, 22,000. Mark whispered to Jamie, voice shaking. I don't understand, son. How can you?" Jamie didn't answer. He was already scanning frequencies, listening, waiting for a response. The plane's instruments flickered. The cabin lights dimmed and brightened in rhythm with the engine's dying breaths. The captain tried another restart procedure, flipping switches, engaging the auxiliary power unit, but the engines remained stubbornly silent. The co-pilot's face was pale, lines of fear etched deep. "We're losing control," he muttered. Passengers clutched loved ones, tears streaming down faces. A man at the rear knelt on the floor, praying aloud. Bobbies wailed. The sound was deafening. Then a faint but distinct voice came through the static. "Junior Falcon, we read you. Hold tight, we're coming." Jamie's eyes widened, relief mixed with disbelief. They heard me. Mark's chest heaved. Who is that?" "Fighters, military," Jamie said, voice trembling but resolute. "They're coming, Dad, they're coming." Above them, Cole and Vargas were already maneuvering at lightning speed. "I want a visual on that flight immediately," Cole barked into the headset. "Keep frequency open. We need every detail. That kid may be our only eyes and ears until we're close enough." The turbulence intensified. The plane's nose dipped dangerously and passengers were thrown forward. A mother clutched her child, whispering over and over, "It's okay, it's okay." But the words had no power against gravity's pull. Jamie's mind raced. He had memorized every emergency protocol, every checklist, every simulation scenario. But he had never imagined doing it for real in real life, with hundreds of strangers' lives in his hands. His palms were slick with sweat. His fingers shook as he held the mic, repeating his coordinates and altitude, trying to make sure the fighters understood exactly where the plane was, how fast it was dropping, and what condition it was in. "Major Cole, I need a confirmation of altitude. How close are you?" Vargas asked nervously through the radio. Cole squinted through the cockpit glass, tracking the falling aircraft against the fatting orange sky. "Too far to stabilize it ourselves yet, but we're coming in fast. That kid, he's precise. Keep him on the mic." Inside the cabin, the plane's descent was terrifyingly real. Mark looked out the window. The clouds whipped by like a storm at sea, electric blue streaks of lightning beginning to crackle in the distance. He gripped Jamie's hand tightly. "Son, I can't believe." Jamie interrupted him, voice sharp, almost commanding despite his age. "Dad, listen. If they're listening, we have to give exact coordinates and read the systems. We can't panic now. Just follow me." Mark nodded, swallowing hard, forcing himself to obey. He repeated Jamie's numbers to the flight deck over the intercom, adding his voice where Jamie's faltered. Every second mattered. Every coordinate, every reading could be the difference between life and death. The altimeter read 21,000 feet. Below them, the ground was still a distant blur but closer than before. Oxygen levels were dropping, cabin pressure buzzing in eerie waves. The plane shuddered again, violently. Overhead bins popped open, spilling luggage into the aisles. Panic surged through passengers like a tidal wave, but Mark noticed a strange calm settling over Jamie. The boy's eyes, wide and bright, locked onto the scanner. He whispered instructions to himself, then keyed the mic again. Anyone military, this is civilian flight. Engines dead, descending uncontrollably. Call sign Junior Falcon." Above them, Cole and Vargas recognized the urgency. Cole's voice came over the radio, firm and commanding. "Junior Falcon, maintain current heading. Keep talking. We're going to make contact and stabilize you. Stay calm." Jamie's lips trembled. Yes, I can do that." Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. He had no idea whether anyone would respond in time. The turbulence grew worse. The plane pitched sharply downward. The ground seemed to rush toward them at an impossible speed. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a strange glimmer appeared outside Jamie's window, a silhouette slicing through the clouds. A fighter jet. Its shadow fell across the cabin like a dark predator, wings cutting clean lines against the stormy sky. Passengers gasped, some shrieked. Mark's jaw went slack. Jamie's voice shook with awe and fear. They're here, Dad." The plane shuddered violently once more. Engines were dead. The ground was approaching. The fighters were close, but could they save them in time? Jamie gripped his radio tighter, preparing to speak again. The answer to that question would determine whether they lived or plummeted to the mountains below. The shadow of the fighter jet loomed closer, cutting through the clouds like a predator zeroing in on its target. Inside the cabin of the stricken airliner, the roar of the engines was replaced by the chaotic symphony of terrified passengers, screams, prayers, and the metallic rattle of unrestrained luggage. Mark held Jamie's hand so tightly it hurt, but the boy's face, pale and determined, was fixed on his radio scanner. "Dad," Jamie whispered, his voice barely audible above the cabin noise, "I think they heard me. I think they're really listening." Mark's throat went dry. "You called for help. A real fighter pilot is responding to you." Jamie nodded. His fingers trembled over the mic as he keyed it once more, and this time his voice carried authority he hadn't known he possessed. "Any military aircraft, this is civilian flight. Engines out, descending rapidly, requesting intercept. Call sign Junior Falcon." The words barely left the microphone before crackling replies came through the static. The F-22 pilots' voices were sharp, disciplined, and full of controlled urgency. "Junior Falcon, we read you. Maintain current altitude as best you can. We're coming in. Visual confirmation in 30 seconds, said Major Cole. Jamie's eyes widened. They're coming, Dad, they're here." Mark swallowed hard, trying to remain calm, but every fiber of him screamed fear. He had flown countless times but never felt this helpless. Every second felt like an eternity, the ground below creeping closer, invisible through the thick clouds, yet somehow threatening to swallow them whole. Cole's voice continued, clear and commanding. "Junior Falcon, we need exact coordinates and system status. Engines unresponsive. Flaps and hydraulics. Give us a full readout." Jamie's mind raced. He had memorized procedures, but this was reality far from simulations. His pulse pounded. "Yes, yes, both engines are completely out. Hydraulics functioning partially, flaps stable but locking intermittently. Altitude decreasing, currently 21,000 feet and dropping." Cole's eyes narrowed as he scanned the rapidly descending aircraft through his HUD. "Understood. Stay calm. We're going to create a wake lift for you. Keep your heading steady. Can you do that?" Jamie nodded even though Cole couldn't see him. "Yes, I can do that." Inside the cabin, passengers were gripping armrests, crying, whispering goodbyes, and screaming in fear. The plane pitched violently, dropping another 1,000 feet. A flight attendant yelled over the chaos, her voice hoarse but authoritative. "Remain calm, fasten your seatbelts, brace positions now." Mark tried to reassure the passengers around them, but even he was shaking. He glanced at Jamie, who looked back at him with an expression that was both terrified and resolute. "Dad, I know what to do," Jamie said, almost more to himself than to Mark. "I've read about this. I can tell the captain what to do step by step." Mark's breath caught. "Jamie, you can't." But the boy was already moving toward the cockpit, radio scanner in hand, weaving past panicked passengers and bouncing luggage. Flight attendants quickly cleared a path, unsure of what the boy planned but sensing the urgency in his eyes. The cockpit doors slid open under pressure, revealing a captain with a pale, lined face. Instruments blinked erratically. The co-pilot's hands were tight on the controls. "You're the one calling the fighters?" the captain asked, disbelief and hope mingled in his voice. "Yes, sir," Jamie replied, his voice firm despite the tremor. "They're here. They can help, but we need to follow emergency procedures exactly." The captain studied him for a heartbeat, then, seeing the determination and calm precision in the boy's eyes, nodded slowly. "All right, you take the lead. Guide me." Jamie took a deep breath, scanning the array of dials, switches, and indicators as he had countless times in simulators. He called out each procedure with clarity. "Fuel pumps on, ignition switch idle, hydraulic crossfeed open, emergency airflow valves open, auxiliary power standby, ignition override now." The captain followed every instruction, his hands shaking but precise. Co-pilot nodded in agreement. Each action brought a sliver of life back into the aircraft's failing systems. Outside, the F-22s streaked through the clouds, engines roaring with controlled power. Cole adjusted his formation, creating a precise airflow to assist the failing airliner. Vargas mirrored him, perfectly synchronized, keeping the airliner's wings steady. The aircraft was still descending, but with every maneuver, every micro-adjustment from the pilots, the plane slowed its fall, just slightly, but enough to make the difference between hope and disaster. Back in the cabin, passengers noticed subtle changes, a slight steadiness, a small decrease in the violent jolts. Whispers of hope threaded through the cries of fear. Mark looked at Jamie, who was still guiding the cockpit, his small hands pointing, his voice steady, precise. The altimeter ticked downward. 1800017500017,000. The ground was closer than ever. Outside, the shadows of the F-22s were visible through the cloud breaks, their sleek silhouettes imposing, almost mythical. Cole's voice crackled over the cockpit comms. "Junior Falcon, follow your checklist precisely. This is it. One wrong move and it's over. You're our eyes, our control. Can you handle it?" Jamie's hands were sweaty, his throat dry, but his response was unwavering. "Yes, sir. I can do it." The captain's face showed disbelief and gratitude as he executed Jamie's instructions. The engines coughed and sputtered, coming alive in short bursts. The plane shuddered with renewed energy. Passengers clutched each other, sensing the tiny but miraculous difference. Bobbies cried, but mothers whispered reassurances, still unsure if hope could survive. Mark leaned toward Jamie, whispering, "You're amazing, kiddo. I don't know how you know all this, but thank you." Jamie looked at him, eyes wide but fierce. "We don't have time to thank anyone. We have to keep going. They're right outside helping us, but we have to follow every step perfectly." Outside, Cole and Vargas maintained the precise positioning of the F-22s. They created a wake lift to stabilize the airliner, working at the very edge of aerodynamics. One wrong maneuver could shear off a wing, but they trusted the boys' guidance. The plane's descent slowed slightly. The altimeter read 15500, 15000, 14,500. Still perilous, but progress. The captain wiped sweat from his brow and spoke into the intercom, voice trembling with urgency and awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some assistance. We are stabilizing. Please remain seated." Passengers dared a collective breath, holding onto a fragile sense of hope. Jamie, still at the cockpit, keyed the mic again. "Fighters, I need you to stay precise. Adjust slightly above, maintain pressure." Cole responded, voice sharp and calm. "Junior Falcon, we've got you. Steady now. Keep guiding the captain. This is the most precise rescue I've ever conducted. Don't falter now." The plane shuddered violently one last time as another lightning streak cracked through the sky. The turbulence was merciless, the clouds a swirling gray storm, but Jamie's voice never wavered. Every instruction, every command was executed with precision and calm beyond his years. Passengers leaned forward, gripping armrests, holding hands, whispering silent prayers. Some looked at the boy, incredulous that this small child with a radio scanner was orchestrating what felt like a miracle in the sky. The altimeter ticked closer to 13,000 feet, still falling but slower now. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, a flicker of hope ignited. The F-22s were close. The engines were responding, even if sporadically. The question hung over every passenger and crew member alike. Could a 12-year-old kid really save this plane? As the ground loomed below, the answer was about to be revealed. But for now, all they could do was trust Junior Falcon. Back on the ground, alarms screamed across the radar room at the nearest Air Force base. Red lights blinked in frantic sequences, echoing against the walls of steel and concrete. Controllers shouted into headsets, issuing coordinates, transmitting emergency codes and scrambling jets. Every second mattered. Hundreds of lives hung in balance. Possible dual-engine failure on civilian flight. Scramble fighters immediately. One controller barked, pounding on the console. Within minutes, pilots leapt into prepped F-22 Raptors, strapping themselves into cockpits with military precision. Engines roared to life, shaking the hangar as fuel trucks rolled out of the way. Major Cole and LT. Vargas were already airborne, racing against time, their supersonic jets cutting the clouds as the civilian plane continued its precarious descent. Back in the cabin, turbulence worsened. The airliner pitched violently, throwing some passengers against their seatbelts, spilling drinks and snacks in every direction. Screams rose in waves. Flight attendants clung to rails and seats, their faces pale but determined. "Brace positions now," one shouted repeatedly, trying to keep the chaos at bay. Mark clutched Jamie's hand so tightly it left white marks, watching as the boy, pale but unwavering, still guided the captain step by step over the radio. Each procedure was executed with surgical precision. The engine sputtered faintly but refused to stabilize fully. The altimeter ticked downward mercilessly. 12000, 11500, 11,000 feet. Jamie looked out the window and froze. Through the cloud cover he saw them, two sleek silhouettes gliding toward them at incredible speed. F-22 Raptors cutting through the storm like guardians of the sky. For a moment, time seemed to freeze in the cabin. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, eyes wide. Some whispered prayers, others simply gasped in awe. "They're real, they're actually here," Jamie whispered, voice trembling with excitement and fear. Major Cole's voice came over the radio, calm but commanding. "Junior Falcon, maintain heading. We're in position. Follow your checklist precisely. One mistake and it's over. Can you handle it?" Jamie swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I can do it." The pilots outside had their work cut out. Cole and Vargas maneuvered into formation with surgical precision, creating a controlled wake turbulence behind their jets. The goal? To create airflow that would stabilize the failing airliner, buying precious seconds for the captain to attempt restarts. Every maneuver was delicate. Too far and the plane would lose lift. Too close and catastrophe awaited. Inside the cabin, passengers could feel a subtle change. The violent shaking had eased, replaced by a shaky but noticeable stability. Some noticed it immediately, others were too focused on holding their loved ones. Mark stared at Jamie in disbelief. "Kid, you're actually doing it. You're talking them through this." Jamie's hands were slick with sweat, fingers gripping the radio. "Dad, keep calm. Everyone just listen and stay steady. This is working, but only if we follow instructions exactly." The captain's voice trembled as he executed the next steps. "Fuel pumps on. Ignition override now. Flaps and hydraulics adjusted as instructed." The plane groaned as systems flickered to life. One engine coughed, spitting fire and smoke, but then roared back. Passengers erupted in whispered gasps of hope. Bobbies wailed, but there was relief in every sob. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, reassuring passengers, directing them to remain in position. Cole's eyes, scanning the instruments and HUD, narrowed. "Hold formation, Vargas. Keep airflow perfect. The plane is responding, but it's fragile. One misalignment and it's over." Vargas nodded. "Roger, I've got the port side. Keep your starboard flow steady." The civilian plane's descent slowed marginally. Altimeter readings dropped more slowly now. 10500, 10,000, 9,800. The difference was subtle but critical. Every second counted. Every micro-adjustment mattered. Back in the cabin, Jamie's voice never wavered, even as he guided the captain through repeated checklist cycles. His mind raced, calculating altitude, speed, and airflow adjustments in real time. For a 12-year-old, he exhibited calm and precision beyond comprehension. Mark glanced around, noticing how passengers were slowly beginning to regain composure. Eyes widened in awe at the F-22s visible through the clouds. Some whispered to neighbors, "Those are fighter jets, look at them." Others simply held their breath, unable to believe the miraculous scene unfolding above them. "Junior Falcon, maintain instructions," Cole said over the radio. "We're giving you 90 seconds of stability. Use them wisely. We're running out of altitude, but you're keeping this plane alive. Can you keep going?" Jamie nodded vigorously, though Cole couldn't see him. "Yes, we can do this." The plane pitched violently one last time, threatening to roll. Outside, the F-22s corrected the airflow with millimeter-perfect adjustments. Cole's jaw was tight, muscles strained as he maintained formation, every second feeling like hours. Inside, passengers clung to one another, faces pale, eyes wide with fear and awe. Mark whispered, "This is insane, it's impossible." Jamie's voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding. "Captain, engine 2 ignition, override now. Flaps to 10 degrees, hydraulic crossfeed, on, hold the nose steady, steady, steady." The captain's hands flew over the controls, executing every command. Sparks of hope flashed across the instruments as the engines roared to life, weakly at first, then stronger. The plane shuddered with renewed energy, climbing fractionally. "Hold tight, everyone," the captain shouted. We're stabilizing. Passengers let out quiet sobs and muttered prayers. Some laughed through tears, others simply stared, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Jamie's small hand still clutched the radio. Fighters, adjust slightly higher, hold pressure, stay in position. This is working, we're holding it. Cole's voice, calm and disciplined, carried through the cockpit intercom. Junior Falcon, you're keeping us alive. One last push and we might just make it to controlled altitude. Don't falter now. The plane's descent slowed dramatically. Altitude readings were still dangerously low, but with the fighter's precision airflow and the engine sputtering back to life, the airliner had a fighting chance. Mark leaned down to Jamie, voice trembling. You're saving lives, son. I can't believe this. You're amazing. Jamie shook his head, eyes on the instruments. We're not done yet, Dad. Not until we're fully stabilized. Every second counts. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the F-22s slicing through the stormy sky, shadows falling across the cabin like celestial guardians. The wind and turbulence roared around them, but inside the airliner, a fragile bubble of stability existed, all thanks to a boy, a father, and pilots working in perfect synchrony. The question remained, could they hold this fragile balance long enough to regain full control, or would the next gust, the next falter, be their last? Jamie keyed the radio again, voice steady, commanding, almost impossibly calm. Fighters, maintain formation, hold our lives in your hands, steady, steady. And as the airliner limped through the clouds, passengers clung to hope, the fighters outside slicing through the storm, and Jamie, Junior Falcon, continued to guide the plane with a courage that no one, not even the most seasoned pilots, could have imagined. The next maneuver would determine if they survived. The plane shuddered violently, a deafening groan of metal and hydraulics filling the cabin. Despite the slight stabilization the F-22s had provided, the engines remained erratic. Sparks of hope flickered and died with each sputter. Passengers clung to their seats, faces pale, eyes wide, praying, crying, whispering, muttering, and gasping in unison. Mark's knuckles turned white from gripping Jamie's hand. Every second stretched into an eternity as the aircraft continued its perilous descent. Jamie's mind raced. He had memorized emergency procedures, memorized every step to restart the engines and regain control, but he had never imagined executing them in real life, at nearly 30,000 feet, with hundreds of lives depending on him. He glanced at the altimeter, 11,000, 10500, 10,000 feet. Time was slipping away like grains of sand. The captain's voice, tight and trembling, came over the intercom. We're trying, engines not responding, we need alternatives. Jamie's voice didn't falter. Sir, you need to follow my instructions exactly. Fuel pumps, ignition override, hydraulic crossfeed, flaps to 15 degrees. He barked the sequence with a strange calm, the kind that only comes from someone who has practiced it thousands of times, even if only in simulations. The engines coughed, sputtered, and then fell silent. Panic gripped the cabin anew. Passengers screamed, bracing themselves as the plane dipped another 1,000 feet. The ground below was no longer a distant threat. It felt imminent, a dark and unforgiving horizon looming closer with every passing second. Junior Falcon, we can't reach you fast enough with formation stabilization alone. Major Cole's voice came over the radio, urgent and clipped. We need to do this differently. I'm going to create slipstream lift around your wings. It'll give you 90 seconds of control maximum. Can you hold it? Jamie swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his hands shaking, but he nodded even though no one could see him. Yes, I can do it, he whispered. The captain looked at the boy with disbelief. You know what you're doing. You're just 12. Jamie met his eyes with a steely determination. I've read every checklist, every manual, every procedure. I can guide you, but we have to work together. Every second counts. Mark's heart threatened to stop. This is insane. You're actually going to do this. Jamie didn't answer. His attention was entirely on the instruments, the radio, the voices guiding him from above. Every system, every gauge, every flickering light mattered. Outside, the two F-22s adjusted their positions with deadly precision. Cole flew slightly above and ahead of the airliner, Vargas slightly to port. Their supersonic jets were slicing through clouds and lightning, creating an invisible shield of turbulent air meant to support the failing plane's wings. One wrong move, one slight miscalculation, and the wings could shear or the plane could roll uncontrollably. They were operating at the absolute limits of human skill and aerodynamics. Inside, the cabin shook again. Passengers pressed their faces to windows looking for some sign of salvation. A mother clutched her child to her chest, whispering prayers. An elderly man muttered, "God help us." Mark tightened his grip on Jamie's hand. "Dad, focus," Jamie whispered. "We have to stabilize before we can even think about the engines." The captain nodded, hands shaking but precise. He followed Jamie's instructions step by step. Adjust flaps to 20 degrees, engage crossfeed, ignition override. The engines roared faintly, coughing back to life but refusing to sustain full power. The plane shuddered violently, pitching slightly downward. Jamie held the radio tight, barking instructions to maintain nose angle, flaps, and hydraulic controls in perfect harmony with the airflow created by the F-22s. Cole's voice was sharp, precise, and urgent. "Junior Falcon, maintain heading. Adjust slightly to starboard. Your wings must remain aligned with our slipstream. You have 45 seconds of support. Make every second count." Vargas mirrored him, ensuring the turbulent air hit the airliner just right, a perfect dance of life and death. Inside, the airliner's descent slowed marginally. Altimeter readings were still dangerously low, 9,500, 9,200, 9,000 feet. But it was progress, a fragile, miraculous sliver of hope. The passengers had begun to sense it too. The violent shaking had eased just enough to give them a glimmer of faith. Bobby's cries mixed with whispers of encouragement, and a tentative energy spread through the cabin. Jamie's voice cut through the intercom, commanding precise. "Captain, ignition switch again, flap steady, crossfeed maintain, engines stabilize, hold steady." The engines coughed again, roared back to life for brief seconds, then fell silent once more. Each time the power returned, hope surged. Each time it failed, despair threatened to take over. Mark's hands shook. He whispered, "Stay with us, Jamie, please." Jamie's eyes never left the instruments. "We will, we have to. Cole, Vargas, I need full airflow now. Adjust by 1 degree, port side, steady." Cole and Vargas adjusted their formation, making microsecond corrections that seemed impossible. The plane shuddered violently, but the wings held. Airflow from the F-22s lifted the failing craft, providing crucial seconds for the engines to attempt a restart. The captain followed Jamie's instructions, sweat pouring down his face, every action trembling with precision. Sparks of fire danced faintly from the turbines as they attempted ignition. Mark pressed his face against the seatback, whispering prayers he hadn't uttered in decades. Passengers clung to hope, their eyes wide, watching the fragile aircraft respond, or not respond, to this improbable alliance of a boy and fighter pilots. Jamie's voice was calm, unwavering, filled with authority far beyond his age. "Maintain nose angle, flaps steady, ignition, now." The engines roared, a deep, ragged growl that slowly strengthened. The aircraft shuddered but lifted fractionally. A cheer erupted from a few passengers, stifled by awe and disbelief. Cole's voice cut through, calm and precise. "Junior Falcon, that's it, we're holding you. Hold the heading. 30 seconds of stability left. Make every moment count." Jamie's hands shook, fingers white on the radio, but he held steady. "Hold steady, hold, engine stabilize, flap adjust, nose level steady." The plane's descent slowed more dramatically now. Altimeter readings hovered near 8,500, 8,400. 8,300 feet. The ground was still below, but for the first time, the passengers could imagine surviving. Mark whispered through clenched teeth, we might actually make it. Jamie didn't respond. His focus was absolute. Lives depended on precision, courage, and timing, and every second mattered. Cole and Vargas maintained formation with surgical exactness, the slipstream lifting the plane in ways that seemed impossible. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly precise. The question remained, could this fragile alignment of skill, courage, and improbable bravery carry them through the worst of it? Or would the plane's failing engines drag them to the ground before salvation arrived? And in the cockpit, Jamie, a 12-year-old boy with a radio, was about to find out. The cabin of the airliner was a scene of organized chaos. Passengers clung to seats, whispered prayers, and murmured words of hope. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering reassurances that only partially calmed the fear-stricken crowd. The engines still sputtered, groaning under the strain of life-or-death maneuvers. Outside, the F-22 Raptors sliced through clouds with surgical precision, their pilots sweating beneath helmets, aware that one miscalculation could shatter every fragile thread of survival. Mark Davis pressed his face against the back of the seat in front of him, watching Jamie in awe. His son, pale but unflinching, gripped the radio scanner like a lifeline. For 12 years, Jamie had dreamt about airplanes, studied procedures, and memorized manuals, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. Now, every life aboard the plane rested on his small shoulders. "Dad," Jamie whispered, voice calm and commanding, "we have to run the emergency checklist again, this time step by step. No shortcuts. The fighters are holding us steady, but it's fragile." Mark's heart pounded. You really know what you're doing." Jamie gave him a brief, intense look. "I have to. Everyone's counting on it." He keyed the mic and addressed the cockpit crew. "Captain, follow my lead. Fuel pumps on. Ignition override now. Hydraulic crossfeed open. Flaps to 15 degrees. Maintain nose angle steady. Steady. Engines attempting restart." The captain's hands flew over the controls, executing each step with trembling precision. The co-pilot monitored instruments, checking readings against Jamie's instructions. Sparks flew faintly from the turbines as the engines coughed back to life in brief bursts. Every roar of power brought hope, every sputter threatened despair. Outside, Major Cole and LT. Vargas maintained their positions with unwavering focus. Cole's eyes scanned the instruments, HUD, and the airliner, adjusting formation constantly to maximize airflow and lift. Vargas mirrored him, perfectly synchronized. The turbulence from the storm swirled violently around them, lightning flashing across the clouds, illuminating the scene like some apocalyptic theater. "Junior Falcon," Cole's voice crackled through the radio, calm and commanding, "you have 60 seconds of stabilized airflow. Maintain all headings precisely. One misstep and the wings will fail. Can you keep it?" Jamie's voice, steady despite the tension, came back. "Yes, I can. We'll hold it." The airliner shuddered again, pitching slightly downward. Altimeter readings: 7500, 7200, 7,000 feet. The ground below loomed like a dark, jagged promise, yet the plane remained airborne barely. Inside the cabin, a wave of terrified realization washed over the passengers. They understood, even subconsciously, that this was no ordinary flight. Their lives depended on a 12-year-old, a father, 2 fighter pilots, and the fragile systems of a damaged plane. Some clutched loved ones, some whispered farewells, some prayed aloud. Mark squeezed Jamie's hand, trying to transmit courage he didn't feel. Jamie keyed the radio again, voice authoritative. "Captain, auxiliary power unit engage. Flaps maintain 15 degrees. Crossfeed hold. Engines attempt ignition. Nose angle steady. Fighters hold steady airflow." The captain followed every instruction, hands shaking but precise. The engines roared to life in staggered bursts, failing again, then returning with slight stability. Sparks of hope flickered through the cabin. Passengers dared to look at one another, sharing glances of disbelief. Some whispered, "It's working, it's actually working." Cole's voice came through. "Junior Falcon, I need precise numbers. Altitude, heading, speed. We can only maintain this for so long." Jamie barked the coordinates. Altitude 6,800, heading 275, speed 280 knots. Maintain formation exactly. 1-degree adjustment to port, slight nose-up correction. Vargas responded over the comms. "Copy that. Adjustment made, hold steady." The plane shuddered violently again as a sudden gust of wind caught the wing. The cabin lurched. Passengers screamed and prayed. Jamie's small hands tightened on the radio. Hold, flap adjustment. Maintain nose angle, engines steady." The engines coughed and roared back to life once more. Sparks danced from the turbines, but the power held this time. The plane lifted fractionally, inches that could mean the difference between life and death. Mark pressed a trembling hand to his chest. I can't believe this is happening. My son is saving us." Jamie's eyes never left the instruments. "Dad, it's not over. We have to run through the checklist completely. Full procedure. Every step matters. Fighters are keeping us airborne, but if we fail even briefly," his voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Failure would be fatal. The captain nodded, following Jamie's instructions precisely. Fuel pumps on. Ignition override check. Flaps adjusted, crossfeed stable, hydraulic system functioning, steady nose angle. Outside, the F-22s maintained their deadly precision. Cole's eyes were locked on the airliner, adjusting airflow, banking slightly to counter turbulence, keeping the fragile aircraft aloft. Vargas mirrored every movement, their skill and coordination flawless under unimaginable pressure. Inside, passengers felt the plane stabilize slightly. Sobs of relief were whispered, tears quietly shed, and some quietly thanked the boy whose voice guided them. Mark leaned toward Jamie. "You're incredible, son. You're really incredible." Jamie gave a brief nod, never breaking focus. "We're not done. One last set of procedures to fully stabilize. Engines, nose angle, flaps, crossfeed. Every reading matters. Fighters maintain airflow. We hold it now, or—" The plane pitched again, but the engines roared in response, finally holding. Altimeter, 6,000, 5,800 feet. The ground was still below, threatening, but for the first time there was real hope that they could survive this ordeal. Jamie keyed the radio one final time. Final checklist, auxiliary power unit online, flaps at 15 degrees, crossfeed stable, engines holding ignition. Nose angle steady. Fighters maintain airflow exactly. We hold this position. Everyone follow cockpit instructions exactly. Cole's voice came calm, relieved, but still commanding. "Junior Falcon, you're holding it. We've got you. Maintain heading. Don't falter now. 30 seconds more of precise formation." Inside the cabin, the plane's violent shaking diminished, replaced by a fragile, miraculous stability. Passengers whispered, cried, and held their loved ones tighter. Mark looked at Jamie, seeing the exhaustion, sweat, and determination on his face. The boy, small and unassuming, had orchestrated something that no adult could have done alone. Jamie's voice, calm and unwavering, commanded the cockpit. "Engine stable, flaps steady, nose angle correct, auxiliary power holding, fighters maintaining airflow. We are holding. Everyone stay calm, we're going to make it." The plane leveled, engines holding enough power to maintain altitude. The impossible had been done. The checklist had worked. But the danger was not over. They were still thousands of feet above the ground, and the storm was far from over. The question lingered in every passenger's mind. Could they maintain this fragile balance long enough to reach a safe landing? Or would the next gust, the next system falter, shatter the miracle they had just created? Jamie keyed the mic again, voice resolute. Fighters maintain position, engine stable, nose level, flaps steady. We hold together, stay sharp. And outside, the two F-22s mirrored his determination, their pilots aware that even a single misstep could end this life-or-death ballet in an instant. The cabin was eerily quiet for the first time since the dual-engine failure. Passengers clung to seats, eyes wide, gripping loved ones, whispering silent prayers. The airliner was no longer violently shaking, but the storm outside raged with a relentless fury. Thunder booming, lightning flashing, wind buffeting the fragile fuselage. Every shadow cast through the emergency lights made the cabin feel like a surreal battlefield. Mark's hand trembled as he held Jamie's, unable to believe the boy was still calmly guiding the captain through what could only be called a miracle. We actually held it, son. We might survive this, he whispered, voice raw with emotion. Jamie didn't respond. His attention remained glued to the instruments and the radio, scanning for any irregularity. Dad, it's not over. We're still descending. Engines are stable enough to keep us airborne, but altitude is still dropping. Every second counts. I need the captain to follow my instructions exactly. The captain nodded, pale and exhausted, sweat pouring down his forehead. His hands moved with precise urgency, flipping switches and adjusting throttle with unflinching trust in Jamie's commands. Auxiliary power unit checked. Flaps 15 degrees. Nose angle steady. Engines holding, he confirmed, voice steady but strained. Outside, Major Cole and LT Vargas maintained formation, slicing through clouds with surgical precision. Lightning illuminated their sleek, imposing silhouettes, and thunder rolled through the sky like the drumbeat of war. Each pilot's focus was absolute. One tiny miscalculation could mean disaster for everyone aboard the failing plane. "Junior Falcon," Cole said over the radio, calm but commanding, "we're approaching controlled descent altitude. Prepare for final maneuvers. We have about 2,000 feet to work with before we can initiate glide for landing. Can you keep the plane steady?" Jamie swallowed hard. "Yes, we can do this. Keep formation exactly. Hold airflow steady, steady, steady." The plane pitched slightly with the turbulence. Passengers gasped and gripped their armrests, some muttering, "We're not going to make it," while others clung to hope. Mark whispered to the woman across the aisle, "This boy, he's saving all our lives. Do you see that? He's amazing." She could only nod, wide-eyed, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe this," she said softly. Inside the cockpit, Jamie barked precise instructions. "Flaps 20 degrees, maintain nose angle, hydraulic cross-feed, steady, engines hold ignition, auxiliary power check, now." The captain followed, every flick of the switch, every throttle adjustment executed with absolute trust. Sparks of fire danced briefly in the turbines as the engines roared to life and held. The plane shuddered but did not fall. Cole's voice came over the radio, clipped and precise. "Junior Falcon, we're maintaining formation. Your glide path looks clear. Keep the heading steady. 90 seconds left to controlled descent. One wrong movement and you lose everything." Jamie's voice was calm, commanding, almost unnaturally steady. "Holding, glide path confirmed, engine stable, flaps steady, nose angle correct. Maintain altitude as best we can, fighters hold tight." The airliner descended slowly, almost imperceptibly. Altimeter readings: 5500, 5,200, 5,000 feet. The storm below had created a surreal mixture of shadow and light through the broken clouds, painting the world in streaks of gray, blue, and white. The passengers felt the difference immediately. The violent shaking had lessened almost entirely. Some dared to whisper words of relief, some prayed, some simply stared at the ceiling, unable to comprehend the miracle taking place. Mark leaned toward Jamie. "Son, you've actually held it. I don't know how, but you've done it." Jamie's small fingers clenched the radio. "Dad, focus. We're not done. Final descent requires perfect synchronization. Fighters must hold position, engines must hold flaps steady, we have to glide to landing approach. Every second matters. The captain adjusted the throttle carefully, eyes flicking between Jamie and the instruments. Flaps 20 degrees, nose angle steady, engines maintaining, glide path confirmed. Outside, Cole and Vargas executed microsecond perfect adjustments, keeping their F-22s in position to maximize lift and stability. The wind howled and lightning split the sky, but the fighters remained a shield against chaos, a guardian barrier keeping the airliner alive. Junior Falcon, you have 30 seconds of stable glide before the storm forces an emergency approach. Can you manage it? Cole asked, tension tight in his voice. Jamie's voice never wavered. Yes, we hold glide, maintain heading, engines hold flaps steady, nose angle correct. The plane continued its slow descent. The cabin remained tense but calm in comparison to the earlier panic. Passengers clung to loved ones, some whispering reassurances, others silently crying. Mark watched his son with awe, the courage and calm beyond his years etched into every movement, every word. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the sky like a divine spotlight on the fragile aircraft. The plane shuddered slightly from a gust, but the engines held. The fighter's slipstream created a perfect cushion, holding the wings against the stress of turbulence. Jamie barked final instructions. Auxiliary power check. Engines holding ignition, flaps steady. Nose angle, maintain glide. Fighters hold formation steady. The plane leveled slightly, a miracle of physics, human skill, and bravery. Altimeter readings. For 500-4200 4,000 feet. The runway below remained hidden in storm clouds, but the path was clear enough for a controlled approach. Mark's voice trembled as he whispered to his son, "Son, you're a hero. You've kept us alive this long, I can't even believe it." Jamie didn't look at him. "We're not done. Controlled descent isn't survival. Landing is. Keep following instructions. Stay calm." The captain nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. He adjusted throttle and flaps, the plane now fully dependent on the boys' precise guidance and the pilot's unwavering support outside. Cole's voice cut through the radio, calm but firm. "Junior Falcon, we're with you. Keep it steady. Glide path clear. Final 2,000 feet to approach. One misstep and it's over. Can you do it?" Jamie swallowed, gripping the radio tightly. "Yes, we hold glide steady, engines hold flaps steady, nose steady." The storm howled, lightning cracked, the wind battered the plane, but a fragile calm filled the cabin. They were still descending, but the miracle of the last few thousand feet had begun. The question lingered, could they survive the landing? Could this improbable, cinematic rescue truly end with salvation? Mark clenched his jaw. "We're so close, so close." Jamie's eyes never left the instruments. "We hold, stay focused. Landing approach, prepare. Everything depends on perfect timing." And outside, the F-22s held formation, slicing through the storm, guardians in the sky, ready to shepherd the fragile airliner through its final, desperate descent. The storm had not relented. Thunder rolled through the sky, shaking the fuselage like a drum of fate, while lightning carved jagged scars across the clouds. The airliner, a fragile vessel of metal and hope, descended with agonizing slowness toward the distant runway, hidden in shadowed darkness. Every heartbeat in the cabin was synchronized with the plane's trembling, as if the world itself held its breath. Mark Davis gripped Jamie's hand until his knuckles whitened. His chest ached, his mind racing between terror and awe. "Son, we're almost there. We might actually make it," he whispered, though his voice quivered. Jamie didn't respond. His focus was absolute, eyes flicking between the instruments, the radio, and the horizon barely visible through sheets of rain and cloud. "Dad, stay calm. Everyone stay calm. We're going to make this, but we have to follow instructions exactly. This is it, the landing." The captain, pale, exhausted, and trembling, nodded at Jamie's guidance. Flaps 25 degrees, nose angle steady, throttle minimal, engines holding, glide path confirmed. Outside, Major Cole and LT. Vargas, drenched in sweat beneath their helmets, maintained formation with surgical precision. Every adjustment of their F-22s was measured in milliseconds. They had kept the airliner aloft against impossible odds, but the final stretch demanded perfection. One miscalculation, one sudden gust of wind, one faltering engine, and hundreds of lives could be lost in a heartbeat. Cole's voice came over the radio, steady but taut. Junior Falcon final approach confirmed. Keep glide path steady. Hold heading. Fighters maintaining lift. Prepare for landing flare. Can you manage it? Jamie's voice, calm, unwavering, and commanding, came back. Yes, we hold. Glide path steady. Engines hold flaps. 25 degrees nose steady. Fighters hold, don't falter. The passengers in the cabin pressed forward instinctively, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief and terror. Whispers of prayers and murmured encouragement filled the air. Bobbies cried, but Mother's hands pressed them gently to their chests. The violent shaking had subsided, replaced by a fragile hope. Mark's eyes never left his son. You've done it. You've kept us alive this far. Jamie's small hands trembled on the radio. Not over, Dad. Not until wheels touch runway, engines must hold. Nose angle perfect. Flare at 200 feet, flare at 150, steady, steady. The captain nodded, hands flying over the controls with meticulous precision, each adjustment responding to Jamie's calm commands. Sparks flickered in the engines, each roar a heartbeat of survival. The plane shuddered slightly but remained airborne. Cole and Vargas were a breath away from exhaustion. Sweat streamed down their faces, muscles tense under the pressure of the impossible task. Every second, every micro-adjustment was a lifeline. Junior Falcon, Cole said, voice tight, we're giving you maximum lift for landing flare. Engines must hold. Nose angle must remain steady. You can do this. Jamie's eyes, wide but fierce, scanned the instruments. Engine stable, flaps, steady, nose, perfect, flare in 3, 2, 1. The plane's nose lifted slightly as if guided by invisible hands. The wheels hovered above the runway for a tense heartbeat. The cabin fell silent, passengers frozen, gripping loved ones, praying, whispering in disbelief. Mark pressed his hands over his son, tears streaming down his face. You did it, you're doing it. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle bump that felt like a miracle. Sparks flew as metal kissed asphalt, the plane shuddering once before stabilizing. The captain maintained throttle and rudder with precision, guided by Jamie's unwavering commands. Outside, rain slicked the runway, but the F-22s had done their part. Every turbulence mitigated, every lift maintained, every life preserved. Junior Falcon, you did it, Cole's voice crackled over the radio, relief flooding every syllable. We've guided you safely to the runway. Controlled landing achieved. Outstanding work. Jamie exhaled, finally allowing himself a small smile. We did it, he whispered, disbelief and relief mingling in his voice. Passengers erupted in quiet cheers, tears, and sobs of relief. Flight attendants embraced, hugged, and whispered thanks. Some passengers fell to their knees, overcome with emotion, hands lifted in gratitude. Mark wrapped Jamie in a tight embrace, his body shaking. Son, you saved us, all of us. You're a hero. Jamie's face, pale and exhausted, lit with the faintest hint of a smile. We all did it, everyone together. The captain, voice shaking, addressed the passengers over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are safely on the runway. Thanks to the skill, courage, and guidance of one very brave young passenger, we have landed safely. Please remain seated while we taxi to the gate. Cole and Vargas circled briefly, then climbed away into the stormy sky, their job done, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A child, a father and pilots performing a symphony of life-saving precision under the most impossible circumstances. Back in the cabin, passengers slowly began to exhale collectively. Tears, laughter, prayers, and disbelief filled the air in equal measure. Some hugged strangers, unable to express gratitude fast enough. Some sat quietly, overwhelmed by the miracle they had survived. Mark looked down at Jamie, face streaked with tears and sweat. "Son, you did it. You really did it." Jamie, exhausted, slumped slightly, but his small voice rang with quiet pride. "We did it together. Everyone did their part. We survived." Outside, the storm began to clear slightly, and the first faint streaks of sunlight pierced the clouds. The runway stretched ahead, a symbol of life restored and a miracle accomplished. For those on the plane, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. They had witnessed courage, precision, and bravery at the most impossible altitude. A 12-year-old boy, his father, and 2 fighter pilots had defied the odds, turning near-certain disaster into survival. Mark held Jamie's hand, whispering softly, "You'll never forget this, will you?" Jamie shook his head, a small, exhausted smile playing on his lips. "Never, but I'll always remember. We did it together." The passengers began to disembark, their legs unsteady, their hearts heavy but grateful. News crews, ambulances, and emergency personnel awaited at the gates, but the true story belonged to those in the air, high above, who had risked everything, and to a small boy whose courage had saved hundreds. And for Jamie Davis, the day that began as a normal flight, soaring through clouds at 9,000 meters, had ended as a legend. A story of bravery, precision, and an impossible rescue guided by a child's determination, a father's love, and the skill of pilots who would never forget the boy known only by his call sign, Junior Falcon. The engines hummed quietly as the plane finally came to a stop. The storm had not defeated them, and for the first time in hours, the cabin felt safe. But even as passengers emerged into the sunlight, the echo of the storm, the roar of engines, and the courage of a 12-year-old would remain etched in memory forever.